When you love what you do, it's hard to finally say goodbye to it. Retirement, in some ways, can be tougher than work, especially if you don't have a plan in place for what you'll do next. In the world of combat sports, impending retirement comes as a relief for some athletes, but for others, it can feel like a weight and it can lead to some truly destructive behaviors. BJ Penn is an MMA legend. Known as the Prodigy in his heyday, Penn is credited as being one of the pillars of the sport, popularizing it and bringing it to international attention. His notoriety helped legitimize the lower weight classes for fans and analysts. A UFC title holder in multiple divisions, Penn has toppled champions, risen to the heights, and gained worldwide acclaim for his skill. If that was the end of the story, he would likely be remembered as a beloved legend. But Penn's passion for the sport of MMA is also an obsession, one that keeps bringing him back to the cage. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need the acclaim. He just needs to fight. How does a legend like Penn spend his fortune? Like, share, and subscribe to the Ultimate Fighting Network as we find out how BJ the Prodigy Penn spends his millions. Like so many old-school fighters, BJ Penn's career earnings don't seem to match the length of time he spent in the organization. This is partially because Penn signed with the UFC in 2001, well before MMA was a millionaire-maker industry. It's also difficult to find exact numbers online for his earliest purses. His first fight reportedly earned him a paltry $3,000 in 2001, but records become more clear in 2004 when Penn fought Matt Hughes for the welterweight championship and a surprising total purse of $50,000. Penn's payouts jumped up to $50,000 to show, $50,000 to win, and stayed there for a while, until his 2008 match with Sean Shirk, which netted him $250,000. Penn's largest purse to date was the $380,000 he won in his rematch against Matt Hughes in 2010, and since then his payouts have hovered around $150,000, especially in his latter matches before he was dropped by the UFC. There are a few things to keep in mind about Penn's career earnings. One is that he was one of the first major pay-per-view draws in UFC history, so even his smaller purses still netted him higher yields from pay-per-view buys. Also, Penn's prime came before the UFC standardized their fight night bonuses to $50,000 in 2014, so some of his bonuses were as high as $80,000. He was no stranger to bonuses either. Penn earned 5 fight night bonuses over the course of his career. Penn was popular before sponsorships really took hold in the UFC, though he has benefited from some Reebok sponsorship money in more recent years. He has an endorsement deal with Last Shot energy drinks, and also had a partnership with clothing company RVCA until they were banned from the UFC by President Dana White. Penn has managed to diversify his businesses throughout his career. He has his own gym, an MMA media distribution website, and has also opened a chain of poke restaurants in his native Hawaii called Fish and Poi Company, which features poi made from fresh taro root grown at Penn's farm in the Waipio Valley. The elephant in the room whenever talking about BJ Penn's finances is that he comes from a family that's fairly well off. This has meant that unlike many fighters, Penn doesn't have to fight to pay his bills. He's always enjoyed it and fights for the passion and the craft. Penn's career earnings in the UFC are estimated at around $3.4 million over the course of 2 decades, but his net worth, according to some online sources, could be as much as $22 million, thanks to his family's wealth and his outside business ventures. Thanks for watching this far. Please help support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We appreciate you. So how does BJ Penn spend his millions? Penn still lives in Hilo, Hawaii, where he was born and raised. Information about his current home is slim, but historically BJ Penn has always had a fairly humble lifestyle for an MMA fighter, especially one with a fortune behind him. For a long time, he lived with his longtime partner and daughters in a home near his siblings and not too far from his parents' historic home, a gorgeous renovated Victorian mansion with a view of Hilo Bay. As stated previously, Penn also runs a farm in the Waipio Valley which grows primarily taro, used to make traditional Hawaiian poi. This farm has also been his pride and joy for nearly a decade and is where he spends much of his time and resources. Penn founded and runs the Penn Hawaii Youth Foundation, a non-profit with the goal of equipping local at-risk youth with discipline through martial arts, a sense of self-worth, and confidence. Penn cares very much for his birthplace and the kids who look up to him as a role model. This love for Hawaii is largely what draws him back to the octagon, even when, perhaps, he shouldn't. Penn is not without his controversies and legal troubles. The world recently learned what he drives thanks to the unfortunate news that he had been in a single-car accident. His beloved Toyota truck was damaged, but Penn is on the mend. He was dropped from the UFC when video surfaced of him getting knocked out in a drunken brawl outside a bar, and he's also been involved in a domestic lawsuit. To say that these are difficult times for Penn emotionally, and perhaps financially, would be an understatement. And despite his desire to avoid full retirement, it's hard to say whether putting him back in the cage would help or only do more damage.
And yeah, he's hurting his legacy. Of course, there's people right now who only started watching fighting in like 2014-15, who don't know BJ Penn. One of the greatest ever. Did unbelievable things at 155, at 170. Went all the way up to 205 to fight Lyoto Machida. People don't know these things about him because of what he's doing now, because of the situation that he's in. Things might not be good at home. Doesn't mean you put him in a cage.
BJ Penn is edging toward a cautionary tale. A legend of the octagon, a true hero of combat sports, Penn is a pioneer who contributed to making the sport of MMA what it is. As his nickname suggests, he was indeed a prodigy whose prime is still talked about. But Penn's legacy is always going to include a footnote. How long should a fighter be allowed to fight? At what point do promoters, analysts, and fans have to say no? And how can organizations navigate the tricky waters of supporting those fighters in their latter years? As Penn's life attests, it's not about money. He doesn't need it. It's about retiring with honor, having a plan, and finding a new purpose when your passion becomes your past. It's not too late for BJ Penn to turn things around, and the whole world is rooting for him to restore his legend and change his legacy. What do you think about BJ Penn? Comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching the Ultimate Fighting Network.